You have a column out in the Financial Times this week about affordable housing, which has become a center point in this presidential campaign, with both sides trying to address sort of the real plight of people trying to buy houses. What's the problem?
Well, I think that if you look at what went wrong with capitalism, the single biggest issue for me is the fact that the average American can't afford to buy a home. And so you have this plight today where more than half of the 20-year-olds in our country are living in with their parents because it's too hard for them to go out and buy their own home. We've had this incredible appreciation in home prices that's happened over the last few decades. In fact, home prices in real terms in America are up more than any other developed country that I really know of significance. And it's the home prices have tripled while this century, while incomes have only doubled. So you have a real sort of affordability issue out here. Why has this happened? And this is what the column tries to address, that we have people sort of offering all these solutions about rent controls, price controls. The real problem with the housing market is the fact that there's a massive supply shortage. By some measures, the number of new homes being created in America today is the same as it was in the 1950s. That's like such a big disconnect. The population has nearly doubled since then, but we're still creating the same number of homes. And after 2008 financial crisis, it's been even more acute.
How much of it was the 2008 financial crisis? Because it strikes me there's probably a hangover from that to some extent. It damaged the housing market so much, a lot of people really didn't want to invest in building houses.
Yeah, I think that there's a bit of that, but this even predates that. So the supply is where the real issue is, which, as I said, that if you look at the supply curve, yeah, we just haven't been building enough homes for a very long period of time for a whole bunch of reasons. A lot of this has to do with the government regulatory state, which is that it's very difficult to build here today, get the permits, deal with all the zoning laws, the coding laws. So the problem with America today is that the zoning laws we have go back to a vision of America back in the 1950s or so, where on large lots you had single-family homes, whereas that's changed today. But the laws haven't changed. And then, of course, you have some cultural issues, too. The whole issue of NIMBYism, which has become so popular.
Like not out here. In my backyard.
Yeah,
right?
Not in my own backyard is the thing, that you don't want anybody else. So you say, yeah, it's an issue we need to address, but not in our own backyard. We don't want more homes out there. So I think that this is a very serious issue. And in fact, I know you mentioned just now that it's become a bigger issue in the campaign. I'm surprised it's not an even bigger issue. But still, in the debate this week between Kamala Harris and Trump, at least Kamala Harris led with that, which was impressive. But the real irony here is that Trump is the builder. And given the fact that he's a builder, I thought he would make a much bigger issue with this or do something about it, because he both campaigns on being the deregulator, as the king of deregulation, and he should understand the housing market. So I'm just a bit mystified why it's not an even bigger issue with the Trump campaign.
So focus in on the regulation, because presumably these regulations, including particularly zoning, are not evenly distributed across the country. Does that mean that the unaffordability is not evenly distributed across the country?
Yeah, so I'd say that the big cities in America in particular have much more zoning, coding laws, and of course you have places like New York and San Francisco dealing with rent controls, which further distort the market. So these markets have been suffering from an affordability issue for a long period of time. But the dramatic change that's happened is that this decade, now pretty much all of America, many cities across America, not just the large ones, housing has become unaffordable if you look at it from a very basic measure, that economists would say that if you spend more than 30% of your income on housing, that means that you're stretched. Now, practically everyone is being forced to spend more than 30% of their income on housing if they want to buy a new home, because it's just so difficult to afford a home given the massive escalation we have seen in prices. And also, of course, it doesn't help that interest rates are on the higher side. But I'd say the bigger issue is the massive price appreciation that's taken place in America because of a big shortage on the supply side over the last few decades.
Which has led to inflation. We're all focused on inflation and therefore real wages or real income. What's the relationship between the growth in real income over time and the cost of housing?
As I said, that if you look at it, that over the last few decades, this century, in fact, the cost of housing has been increasing at a far greater rate than either inflation or real wages. So therefore, it's made the affordability become very difficult in this country. So I think that this is a broader statement here, David, about the regulatory state that we have in America, which is that we have created so many new regulations in our as that old line goes, that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So the government thinks it's doing the right thing, but in terms of it's trying to create more and more protection, it thinks. But in doing so, it's created this regulatory state which is stifling business. So the other related topic here, which also I've written about in the past, is that small and mid-size businesses, their confidence today is very low. It's almost back to where it was near the 2008 global financial crisis, whereas the large conglomerates and the large businesses which can deal with the regulatory state in a more efficient way, their confidence is far higher. So we're seeing this across the state, and the housing market is obviously where it impacts the average consumer the most.
The level of regulation is very much in the presidential campaign right now. But when you talk about housing, you have to talk about which government, not just government, but which government, because an awful lot of those regulations you're talking about are not federal regulations. There's not a federal zoning law. So is it really within the power of the federal government to preempt national zoning?
Well, they can do stuff to create a better incentive system, right? I mean, you make it a campaign issue. I agree that this is still a very federal country, and this is a broader topic about even the campaign, that we focus so much on the policies of what they are saying without sort of focusing on how much can really get done, whether it's the Congress or, as you say, it's the local governments and the state governments. But there are incentive systems that the central government can create to improve the housing market. As that old line goes, the first step to a cure is to diagnose the problem. So the issue is that this is now finally becoming a center stage issue in the campaign. There was very little discussion of this, in fact, until Kamala Harris picked it up a few weeks ago. Until then, I was shocked that there's no discussion about this, whereas that this is the single biggest grievance of most people. You have a dinner table conversation. It should be so obvious to anyone with a political antenna that this is the single biggest issue.
And as you say, we haven't heard much, I don't believe, from Donald Trump, former President Trump, about what he would do about this problem. When Kamala Harris, the vice president, came up with a proposal, a lot of economists were critical, saying what you're addressing is a lot of the demand side, not the supply side. You're going to give people tax breaks. You're going to be able to jack up the prices of housing, but it doesn't create more housing.
Yeah, so I think that she's done both. Yes, in terms of offering subsidies is like distortion, but she's walked back from some of the Biden proposals of rent control and all. I think she's quietly backed away from that, and she did focus a bit more on the supply side when she's speaking about that. And Trump, too, has responded to it. When he made his speech last week at the Economic Club of New York, he did talk about housing. But I just wish that it was an even bigger focus, given the fact that he is naturally a builder and his campaign should be build, build, build.